You're listening to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Show, a podcast to inspire physicians in the process of immigration to the United States and access to graduate medical education. We create meaningful and helpful content that motivates medical students and doctors throughout the world, with the goal of creating a community that supports itself and gives feedback to each other, that stays updated with the most recent tips and advice on how to make it in America and become a successful resident or fellow in the speciality of your dreams. Dr. Alonso Osorio is board certified and residency trained in both emergency and family medicine and will be bringing you 20 years of his personal experiences, struggles, and motivation. We'll be chatting with people like you to talk about the lessons they've learned along their personal path, how to make an impact, and how we can all benefit from it. Also, we'll analyse the current resources available and how to benefit from them. Thanks for joining us. Please enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a special episode regarding an outstanding Black physician in our community. And the reason why we're bringing Dr. Terrence Julien is because he's an impressive neurosurgeon that has accomplished so much in his personal life and his professional career. And he becomes such a motivational speaker, and I almost shed tears while listening to his stories and the painful process and the difficult process that he had to deal with over the last 20 years of professional training and personal growth. So segregation in America is palpable. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's not a situation that could be ignored, but it has historical roots. And so I'm going to probably bring it up later on the episode. As an immigrant, I wanted to educate myself on this topic. And I read this book called The Color of Law. I found it rather enlightening to understand the perspective of how the political and government organizations led to segregation of Black people and minorities in this country. The Color of Law is written by Richard Ronstein, and it talks about a forgotten history of how our government in the U.S. segregated America by itself. And I highly recommend it. It's about 9 hours and a half of hardcore content that really enlightens those people that have never really got the facts on this. Obviously, the factors of racism may vary from country to country due to many historic, cultural, religious, economic, or demographic reasons, but several people assert that racism and ethnic discrimination in the United States is remarkably deep and is inherent to certain fundamental aspects of the North American society. Historically, racism constitutes to be reflected in the socioeconomic inequality. Racial stratification still continues to this day to occur in employment, housing, education, lending, and government. Racism, specifically in the United States, has been a major issue ever since the era of colonialism and slavery. Legally sanctioned racism imposed a heavy burden on Native Americans, African Americans, Latino Americans like me, Americans from lesser developed parts of Europe, and Asian Americans. The European Americans were remarkably privileged by the law in matters of literacy, immigration, voting rights, citizenship, land acquisition, and criminal procedurings over the time that extended all the way back to the 17th century to the 1960s. However, numerous European ethnic groups, including the Jews, Irish, Southern European, and Eastern European Americans, as well as immigrants from elsewhere, have suffered xenophobic exclusion and other forms of racism in the American society. And the reason why I say this is because this is not only happening to Black Americans. And as in most countries, many people in the U.S. continue to have some prejudice against other races. We're not saying only Black. Asian Americans, Latino Americans, American Indians, etc. So we need to continue to really pay attention to the current situation on that. And my message is a message of love. I don't want to create any hard feelings on any of you. Obviously, there's going to be people making a lot of statements regarding this, but the purpose of this podcast is not only motivational, but educational and could be somehow controversial. But we're going to use Dr. Julien as a significant example of accomplishment and success in the U.S. So please listen carefully, and I hope you enjoyed the show that Dr. Julien and I have put with a lot of effort and love for you guys. Thanks. Hi, guys, and welcome to the Foreign and International Medical Graduate Podcast. And today we are having Dr. Terrence Julien. is a neurosurgeon. For those that are non-medical, that means a brain surgeon. He currently practices in the institution that I do belong, and we actually got connected to there. And Dr. Julien, despite that he's not a foreign or an international medical graduate, we try to stay current with the current political and economical situation also that is happening in the world and in the United States. And, we have been speaking about the pandemic, and we brought some guests to speak about COVID-19 in the past. Dr. Aneja gave us some good information, and she'll be coming onto the show in the near future to see what's the progress that we're doing with disease process. And Dr. Julien, like me, a minority and a successful physician in the United States, and with the significant controversy in the news that you guys are seeing about the Black Lives Matters movements, BLM movement, I thought that Dr. Julien was going to be a phenomenal character to bring in, not only for his huge personal, professional accomplishments, but when I say he's a minority, he is, a person of color like me, but he's American Black. And he has done so much for himself, and I was going over his resume, and I was remarkably impressed. We're going over about 12 to 15 pages of some really phenomenal accomplishment that he has had throughout his career. Dr. Julien is a medical doctor, an MD, that is originally from Delaware, and his undergrad at University of Delaware, graduating with a major in biology and pre-medicine and a minor in psychology in 1998. And then he was immediately eager to attend medical school, and he went into Howard University, where he graduated in 1993. Dr. Julien, first of all, before I continue introducing you and you to tell us about yourself, thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of the Foreign International Medical Graduate Podcast.
Sure. I am a first generation born in the U.S., but my parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago, so most of my family is from Caribbean descent. And so I incorporate a lot of that into my daily life. My father was very particular about education, which most of the Caribbeans that come to the U.S. back in that time, back in the 60s, they were one of the first few that immigrated into the United States. Obviously, it was a very difficult time, not only socioeconomically, unrest of the 60s. My parents always told me stories about that growing up. And it was very difficult for them because not only were they minorities, but they were minorities among the minorities being of Caribbean descent. And so back in the 60s, American Black minorities really didn't partake among the Caribbeans that came to the U.S. because the first few that came to the U.S. had very high drive and distinction academically. I mean, that was the only way you can get to the U.S. You had to be, top 1% within your class in order for the government. Sometimes, the government would sponsor a lot of people to come to the U.S. And so obviously it was very competitive and you had to be, the best of the best. And so my father and a lot of his friends immigrated to Canada and in the U.S. I actually was almost a Canadian citizen because my parents went to Canada first, along with a lot of his friends. In Winnipeg, there's a strong contingent of Caribbeans in Winnipeg, Canada, because they can't get into the U.S. Initially, they go to Canada because it's a lot easier to get into Canada. And so a lot of his friends either went into engineering or medicine. And that was what most of his friends went into. My father was an engineer, he was a mechanical engineer. So that was the background of myself, my brother. Education was very pertinent and very stringently kind of expressed in our family. And my father always strove to make sure that, we put education first. He let us obviously play our sports and that sort of thing, but as long as it didn't interfere with our education. And so I always wanted to be a physician. My mom told me from age 5, I've always wanted to be a doctor. And so that was my pursuing goal. That was always, my goal was no matter what I did, I always knew that, it had to have some respect or some way to make sure that I was going to be able to attain my goal, and that was to be a doctor. And so, go ahead. You're going to ask me something?
So first of all, let me trace back. Your parents immigrated from Trinidad and Tobago. You're obviously a minority like me. You're from the Caribbean. And one of the important things that your father always reminded you of is that education was the only way to succeed in life. And yes, you started being successful since very early on. You and I, in our preliminary conversation, you have said that you became nominated to the Who is Who in America very early on since high school due to your personal achievements. And I see that you kept getting nominated through the years until recently, back to year after year on that.
Yeah. So my first Who's Who accomplishment was in high school. I believe it was my junior year in high school. And Who's Who is the kind of recognition where and once you get awarded, they kind of follow you, particularly at that age, they follow your career. And then through college and med school, I got nominated and recognized a couple times through that process. And then obviously, once I was finished my education, got recognized more and more because obviously, doing more accomplishments, more outside awards and that sort of thing. And like I said, they really follow you. Once you get nominated and recognized at an early age, they kind of follow your career. That's why if you look at my CV, there's a lot of Who's Who recognitions in Who's Who in America, Who's Who in the world, Who's Who in healthcare, because that's obviously, was the industry that I ended up in. And so that is one of the things that, I'm very proud of. It's kind of helped me because that gives me something that I get recognized for, particularly in medicine. As you know, it's very competitive. So,
and obviously, to make it into medical school as a minority is also a rarity. Specifically, what would you say that is the percentage of American Black or Blacks in certain medical school? I know that you specifically attended Howard University, where there is a larger percentage of Blacks, but they're also friendly to other minorities and people alike.
It's interesting. The Black minorities make up about 2 to 3% of all the physicians in the U.S. And actually, I think as of last year, Black females outnumber Black males for the first time. So that shows you kind of what's going on in our country. The only ethnicity where that has ever happened. That's, it's good in one respect, but it's also, disparaging in others because it shows that the plight of the Black male in this country.
Yes, that's a very hot topic also to discuss. And please understand, the listeners, that I grew up in Colombia, and for me coming to this country and going through the culturization process, I personally, in my country, I never experienced this sort of racial phenomenon that I have to deal here on a regular basis in America. And I'm always learning, and I know that we need to be, quote unquote, politically correct and be extremely careful how we manage this critical topic. And right now seems to be the hot button that cannot be pushed because you can get in real trouble really easy. But in my personal case, I never had an issue like this. And through the 20 years that I've been in America, I learned more and more and more and more. And what I have done for the last few weeks is actually I picked up a book called The Color of Law. To try to really understand the phenomenon of de jure and de facto segregation, to get myself exposed to the history. And what is interesting about this book is how the government somehow, through history, has purposely segregated minorities and Blacks in America to have purposely access to less education or less quality education, to lock them up into certain areas of neighborhoods and not let them break the cycle. And obviously, you came from a very highly educated family. You're the son of a mechanical engineer, which is not specifically the circumstances of many Black American. The culture, unfortunately, has an absence of fathers that have been caught sometimes in crime and violence. But I think the circumstances in this country has led the culture to be that way. But I think we can probably be an example and a motivation in how we can make things better.
I completely agree.
To say at least, to make it into medicine, first of all, you have to have a huge resume, and you have it. And then not only to be a doctor in America with a medical degree behind your name, you also pursue neurosurgeon. Tell us how this passion for brain surgery and how in the world you make it in the most regarded specialty.
Yeah.
I would say in the world, because the United States is the mecca of medicine of the 20th and 21st century, the top of the top of the top. I mean, in being a minority, that's huge.
It's very huge. And it wasn't easy.
Go on. Do you mind expanding on the feelings? On what was the path?
Sure. Got good grades in high school, college, med school. I always wanted to do and deal with brain. I was initially thought that I was going to go into neurology, and that's what I was working towards. That's why you see my CV, I have a psychology minor, because all of the courses that I took had getting a minor in psychology. I could have stayed like another semester, taking 2 other courses and double majored if I wanted to. But I was always interested in neuroscience, the brain, in particular brain tumors. And that's why if you look at my CV, I did some fellowships did a research fellowship at Sloan Memorial and then a clinical fellowship down here in Tampa at Moffitt Cancer Center. So I always was intrigued about the brain, neuroscience, and in particular, the interaction of oncology. And so during my undergrad years, I geared myself towards molecular biology because that was one of the new sort of basic sciences that was coming up in the 80s, molecular biology and how it related to neuroscience. So because that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a neurologist and kind of work in the basic science aspects of that as well. When I got to med school, first day, we meet all the chiefs of all the services. And each chief kind of asks you, what you're doing, what got you interested in medicine. So I met Dr. Gary Dennis. Told him that, I have interest in neuroscience, brain tumors. I was thinking of being a neurologist. And he kind of looked at me kind of quizzically, and he was like, "No, you don't." He said, you need to come spend some time with me." So my first year, my second week, my basic science courses, I met with him. He was like, "Yeah, come spend some time with me." So as a couple of on my off time, I would go to the OR, and then I was really intrigued by it. And my second year, I did a scientific project with him. It was looking at gunshot wounds, because you remember this was the 80s, and so DC was very prevalent, among violence in the 80s, and so they dealt with a lot of gunshot wounds at Howard University Hospital and DC General. Howard covered DC General back then. It's no longer around now, but between DC General and then HUH. A lot of gunshot wounds, knife and gun club, for sure. And so he had me kind of look at retrospectively some of the GSWs to the head, see how the outcomes were, looking at their CAT scan data, and then we put a paper together and we actually got it published. And so with that kind of work, I was like, you know what, I think I could. This is the field for me. And so at Howard, they have a fellowship. It's called the Mitchell Foundation Fellowship. 2 people each year get to apply and get recognized. And so that ended up being the work that I did with him. I was one of the Mitchell Foundation Fellows. Got a little stipend associated with it. We had to produce the work and then and get. The basic thing is that had to get the manuscript published. And so that was the manuscript and the work that I did with him. And that really got me interested in neurosurgery.
So not only you attend a school that is mostly prevalently Black, but you become the best of the best within the minority, and you excel to become one of the 2 holders of an academic scholarship to pursue a fellowship in research in neurotrauma.
Yes, it was surgery and surgical subspecialties was a fellowship. Because Dr. Mitchell, he was, I believe he was either colorectal surgeon or a transplant surgeon, and he established that fellowship. So any surgery or surgical subspecialty medical student in their second year, that was like prepare them in order to get before they went into the third year.
Awesome. So you did this fellowship, but I guess that was the little seeds that you planted to move on into the next step.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is when the going gets tough, because you're applying to brain surgery, neurosurgery in America, guys. I rotated to the neurosurgeon as an emergency physician on my first year, 1 month, on my second year, 1 month, and my third year, a couple months. And it's the most brutal rotation I ever done in my life. I did like 4 months within a 36-month period. Dr. Julien did this for the 7 years of residency training in neurosurgery, plus all the fellowships that you have accomplished. Oh my God, they're huge. Neurology, oncology, what else?
Well, I will say, I don't want to forget the people that helped me. So at Howard at that time, Dr. Barber was still on staff, and he was the third Black person to get trained in neurosurgery ever. And
the third Black neurosurgeon American. Guys, and why we're talking about this is because, guys, I'm just going to be blunt. Neurosurgery is a white person, especially.
I always say
no women.
Is the last vestige of white medicine in America.
Yes, sir. You have said it better than I could have.
And it's been the case. I mean, kind of going through it all and everything, I'm telling you, it is. I grew up in the suburbs in white America. That's why, everyone always jokes with me and saying why you talk the way because I grew up, in the suburbs. And so, I've always been around, white people. That's what my father wanted. He wanted to make sure that we were around people who are highly motivated, highly educated. So that would be one less thing, because being a Caribbean like you, probably more so than I do, having an accent and that sort of thing, it makes you stick out in the crowd when you're around areas of educated people in America. It is what it is. That's my father talked to me about it all the time. That's why he's like, my parents both have very thick, obviously Trinidadian accents. And my dad talked about it all the time, and how he said if there's one thing that he wished he didn't have is that accent. Because that accent it's hard enough being Black. But being Black with a Caribbean accent, it would made it particularly hard for him to get ahead in America.
And this is a question that probably I have never asked before, but I always ask myself. And as I said, without trying to make an offense to anyone, what were the teachings or the heads up or the educations or the pointers that your father told you about this racism that is so prevalent in America? What was his few things that he told you to carry yourself or to act or to do, or what were the things?
Part of it was carrying yourself. You had to carry yourself the way they do. You had to be, obviously, it's a cliche, but you hear it from every Black person that has gotten ahead. You have to be the best white person, and that you're competing with. You have to be better than them, because you're at a disadvantage automatically. You walk in the room and you're automatically at a disadvantage. They see you're Black, and on paper, you're like, oh yeah, this is a very, well-rounded, educated, person. But as soon as you walk in the room, they see that you're Black. And that puts, one check, against you. No matter what you say, no matter, who you're competing against, there's always that little check mark against you, being a Black American. And so my father always said, you have to walk the walk, talk the talk, but then when you're competing against other people, you have to be better than them. And he said, it's not fair, it's not right, but this is how it is in America.
Wow, that's beautiful teachings. And, as a Latino, I would say immigrant Hispanics were also one of the groups that is, after American natives, one of the top segregated groups in the United States. And as you said, my accent has gotten me in trouble sometimes. Things get twisted or misinterpreted or just...
He said that there's one thing that he wishes he could change about himself, it's his accent. And I'm like, looking at him, I'm like, why? I love your accent. I said, I wish I had your accent. And he was like, no, you don't. He's like, where we are and how you are is for a particular reason. Yes, because all the misgivings and hardships that me and your mom had to go through. being in America all these years.
Well, you were referencing one of the top first three neurosurgeons, one of your attendings that you are extremely thankful for. Let's go back to that and retake from that part of the story that it seems to be extremely moving to you.
Yeah, Dr. Barber was, as I said, he was the third trained neurosurgeon in the country, Black trained. When I got there, he had just, I think, stepped down the year before or 2 years ago as the chairman. And so Dr. Gary Dennis was the chairman at the time. He's from Louisiana. He was the first Black neurosurgeon trained at Baylor University. Wow. So you can see it as a lot of heritage, in the 80s, at that time. And then Dr. LaFall, I don't know if you know who Dr. LaFall is. He just passed away last year. He was a preeminent cancer surgeon, and to the point where he was president of the American Cancer Association, the only Black, surgeon that's ever been president of the American Cancer Association. He was amazing. I mean, not only Dr. Dennis, but when I started doing my third-year rotations and we would do a general surgery, I was able to scrub cases with him. He was an amazing, amazing man. I mean, we always used to hear the stories about how he never had to study during med school. He had a 100% total recall. So he would just listen during the lectures. And then, we always used to hear, because a lot of his colleagues were in med school with him. And one of them, Dr. Collender, who was a transplant surgeon, always used to tell this story about how he and LaFall, he'd be studying, for, exams. And Dr. LaFall would walk in, say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he's like, and he used to ask him, "Weren't you studying for a test tomorrow?" He's like, "Nah, I'm good." And then he would go in and get 100. And
he would ace it, huh?
It's like he had that kind of a recall, that kind of memory. And so he was an amazing person. And then on top of that, he was a brilliant surgeon. Sometimes we often see that in surgical subspecialties, that people who are really, really good, smart, that they're not good hands-wise. But he was very good, chairman of this Department of Surgery. And like I said, he was president of the ACA, which is not a small accomplishment.
For the non-medical listeners, we are touching right now something that he just said. When you become a brain surgeon, you have to have a huge dexterity with your hands, which you need to be good with your hands to move along, to deal with little microscopes operating on tiny little brain aneurysms or blood vessels and very particular areas that if you don't touch properly or manipulate the proper way or use a cautery on the wrong region, you can affect the patient permanently.
Affect them permanently.
So you not only have to be smart, but you also have to be good with your hands. So you were obviously proven that you are good with fine motor skills.
Yeah, that's one thing that I found during school is that, I had a good knack for surgery and I liked it.
Dr. Julien, for our listeners that do not know anything about how the process of training in neurosurgery in America, can you briefly summarize it so they get a grip on what you went through, the pain?
Sure. So back when I trained, we had to do 1 year of general surgery, which was the transitional year where we kind of rotated through all the surgical subspecialties. And then at that time, it was 1 in 6, so 1 year of general surgery, and 6 years of neurosurgery. I spent 2 years on the neurosurgery service. And then from there, I was able to get an advanced spot at State University of New York, Upstate Medical Center. And so I had to repeat my third year, so I did 8 years of neurosurgery.
Followed by how many?
Followed by, so 1 in 7, so 1 year of general surgery, 7 years of neurosurgery, and then I did 2 fellowships. I did a research at Memorial Sloan-Kettering, and I did a clinical fellowship at Moffitt Cancer Center. So I did 10 years of training.
After 4 years of medical school?
And 4 years.
And 4 years of college.
Yeah.
So after 18 years, you have finally gotten here.
20 plus years education if you add all the high school and everything.
You and I, during a lunch 2 weeks ago, had a discussion that after so many years of training, after having accomplished so much financially, because neurosurgeons don't make like $5 a year. We're talking about they work hard, but they are highly compensated. So there is a lot of personal investment and time. 20 years in the making to be financially stable, and he deserves it because he's dealing with complex things that in the 21st century, we don't really get to understand it very well. He also dedicates himself to the most complex cases like glioblastoma multiforme, which is a horrible malignant brain tumor. And he specializes in working on that and anything brain related to tumors. And so everything that he has done has been so good academically, professionally. But during the discussion that we had is that I think he has gotten to the point in his life that is the time to give back. And he was very passionate about the fact that he felt that everything has been done from his endpoint for himself. Now it's time to give back. Tell us about how you feel about this accomplishment in your life and what's the next step, reflective part.
Sure. I've been in academics, my whole career up to this point. And so, spent, 12 years in academics. When I last left, I was associate professor in neurosurgery. And so, had all kind of directorships and everything and training. And I would say that, the one thing that I liked most about, academics is training residents. That's the one thing I really liked. The impartation of the knowledge, that we have, each surgeon that we have, because we all have different kind of educations and different experiences. And so, at some point, but it does wear on you because, like we were talking about, aside from just all the clinical sort of responsibilities, then you have academic responsibilities as well. So you have to publish. Teaching was never a problem, so I didn't mind doing that. But then I had other sort of interests as well. I like product development and that sort of thing, and so I was doing that as well, and so I was really doing a lot. And so I got to the point where I wanted to kind of do my clinical work and then do my kind of product development sort of interests as well, and not have, other sort of, requirements that I was kind of not paying attention to. And so, because they're always there, particularly in academics, there's always, something that kind of your time is attributed to. And so, my father passed away a couple of years ago, and I wanted to move down, be closer to my mother. And so, the position here, they had still not filled. And I did a fellowship in Tampa. So I'm very familiar with Tampa. I like Tampa, and, said to myself at some point, I would want to come back to Tampa, if not to practice, maybe to retire or something like that. And so, the opportunity opened up. And so I came here back to Tampa, which allowed me to kind of still practice in the area and able to do some of the things that I want, kind of interested in still doing.
So Dr. Julien is an imposing, tall, 6'5".
No.
The muscular man.
I'm 6'1".
6'1", that drives a phenomenal gray Maserati. And he's now here with us in Tampa. And I had the privilege to give him the orientation at my hospital when he initially joined us. And I'm really thankful for you being here, because it's so hard to get an hour of a brain surgeon to just talk to someone in general about life. But Dr. Julien, let me go back a little bit. Okay. I know that you broke the cycle of segregation and the competitiveness of getting into such a niche of white people. What barriers you had to go through that were not really obvious? They were like de facto, like hidden, segregated, but that it was happening. What was it like? Give us a few examples live without bringing names or people, but
back in the 80s, medicine was very resistant to still, letting minorities, particularly Black minorities, in their ranks. And so, first applied to medical school. I didn't get in initially. And so I did spend a year doing research. And then that kind of allowed me to enhance, my resume to the point where I was able to get in. I got in at Howard and Thomas Jefferson. I initially waitlisted at Jeff, and then I'd already moved down to DC. And then by the time they told me that I got in, it was like the first week of med school at Howard. And so I was already there. I was like, you know what? Plus my father went to Howard for undergrad, and he got his engineering degree at Howard. So I was like, let me just stay here. I mean, I was already there, and I think that was one of the best decisions that I made, because it gave me a very different sense culturally of being Black in America. Because like I said, up until that point, I was always, in the suburbs around white people. And even University of Delaware was, I hate saying this, but there were about 15,000 students in University of Delaware when I was there. There were less than 500 Black people, minorities, not just Black, not minorities, but less than 500. They think about that, of a school of 15,000.
What was like, or what is like to be Black in America? It's
very difficult. Growing up, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. It was a rough time in America. The N-word was flung around. I jokingly tell people, growing up in the 70s, I heard the N-word so many times, I would think it was my middle name. So, it's really rough growing up in America. And hearing you kind of say that, you will never experience that. I mean, it does lend to the fact that I was like, man, I wonder how I would be different, if I didn't have to experience that, growing up.
Did it make you tougher? Did it make you?
Oh, it definitely did. It hardens you, and it makes you persistent, makes you very persistent, because getting in, to medical school, was a chore, but getting into neurosurgery was almost impossible, being Black in this country. When I was at NYU doing my fellowship, surprisingly, there were two other Black residents there with me. They were both in the years ahead of me. And so the three of us, we used to always hang out, always go to conferences and everything together. And back then, it's the 80s, early 90s, middle of the AIDS epidemic in New York City. So I was there from 94 to 96, which was right in the middle of the AIDS epidemic in New York. And so, back then, the imaging wasn't as good. MRIs weren't as good as they are now. So in order to diagnose someone that had toxo of the brain or anything like that, we had to do brain biopsies. And my chairman, since he was a brain specialist, because consulted to do these, and he hated to do them because, patients were HIV positive, and, most of them were, minorities. And, I hate to say it, but, he was Irish, and he had his own set of attitudes that, would make one think about if he really was someone who was, distasteful of minorities. There were a couple times where, we would go over a conference, pre-op conference, and, we used to see a lot of AIDS patients, like I said, and, several comments were made by, of course, all the professors were white. So several comments were made about the patients, whether being Black, whether being on crack, whatever, saying that, this is a waste of time, why we have to biopsy, this crack, this crack, whatever. And so, and knowing that they had three minority residents, that were in the auditorium listening to what they're saying, didn't care one bit.
Wow. Well, that's shocking, guys. And I think that you were also lucky enough that during your training, you found a very progressive program director that was all inclusive. And you said that your training program looked like the United Nations. They had a white, a woman, a Latino, Black.
That's correct. So from there, from NYU, I went on to SUNY Upstate, and my chairman there, his name was Dr. Hodge, Charles Hodge. And all of my friends say that we owe our professional lives to him. I mean, he was very progressive. And like I was telling you, we had in my class, there was me and one other Black minority. We had an Asian. We had 2 women. It was even more of a rarity back then in the 90s than being Black male. So, yeah, I mean, there was a time where all the senior residents were white, and then all the residents behind them, including myself, were minorities. So at one point in the residency, minorities outnumbered the white people, which was the only program in America that was like that.
It is amazing. And what do you think it would be the way to start changing our culture? I know that this movement has created a lot of criticism. And how do we do it from within ourselves individually?
People like my chairman, because all the people in power are white, but it's going to take, obviously white people who are in places of power that aren't going to be afraid to elevate minorities, women. I mean, until that happens, nothing really is going to change in this country. And you look at our president now, and, it feels like we're back in the 50s and 60s, to be perfectly honest.
Yes, it is extremely sad. And I try to stay away from making political comments because I know people are going to be posting, doing a lot of hate commenting and stuff like that. But, it is hard to uncover the truth. It is hard. So I'm going to ask you this. You and I have met. We're in a cocktail party, and it's not about being a doctor. And I'm a normal person. I'm a banker, and you happen to be there, extremely well dressed. And hello, hi, what's your name? I said, my name is Alonso. Sorry, and your name? I'm Dr. Terrence Julien. Oh, you're a doctor. So their eyes probably popped out. And then you tell them, oh, really? What kind of a doctor you are? And you tell them, I'm a brain surgeon. And they probably poop on their pants.
Let me tell you, because it's happened so many times that I don't tell people what I do unless they specifically ask. So they ask, what do you do? And a lot of people will do that. And I'll just say, oh, I'm just a physician. I don't say anything else. Sometimes people kind of pry. I let them get one question in, and I will literally deflect it. And if they're persistent, then I say, all right, I let them. I say I'm a neurosurgeon. Because once they find out you're a neurosurgeon, it's like everything changes. And I'm like, I don't want to be portrayed that way. You should be interested in who I am because of, we're here talking and everything. But once they find out that you're a neurosurgeon, they're just like, this guy has to be somebody. He's not only a neurosurgeon, but he's Black. Like, holy cow, how the hell did that happen? So it's like one of those things.
I wanted to ask that. So let's get motivational. Let's say that we have an auditorium full of Black kids that are not privileged as you were growing up. Let's say that these are kids from Tampa that are obviously minorities and they have very poor access to education. They have single mothers with no parent images, with horrible exposure to domestic violence and street drugs, plenty of dropouts. And I bring you in, Dr. Julien, as the example for the community that things can change. What would be the message that you will give a 15, 13-year-old kid that is really struggling to make it?
The one thing that I would tell them is that, and it's kind of multifactorial because, you have to relate to them. And, obviously I can relate to them being Black. My upbringing is obviously different from theirs. And so, I would relate to them that, even though I had a different upbringing, I still went through the same, sort of racism, roadblocks, adversities that all of them would go through. And so, the biggest thing is you have to find a mentor. And that's the one thing that I kind of strive to do. If anyone wants me to be their mentor, I'm my way to help them, because it's very, very difficult to get ahead, and not only get ahead, but to break out of that cycle alone. I mean, it's been done. Obviously, it has been done, but it's very difficult, and it takes someone of very unique character to kind of do that. Someone who is able to kind of have blinders on, only looking at, the main goal is to get out of their situation. And even then, there's some very promising young people that still have issues and difficulties in doing that. So, that would be one of the one things that I would tell them is, find a mentor, work with someone to kind of help you and guide you. And I think that's the biggest thing, is to guide you on the correct path. Because someone like me, I've been through a lot of adversity. So I know kind of some of the things that they need to look out for to kind of help them to get out of where they're at. Because not only will they have to, kind of navigate through life, but, they'll have to navigate through their current living situation as well. And none of us can really know what that's like. Only they can know what that's like. And so whoever or whatever they can do to kind of help them to kind of navigate through life experiences, to kind of make things just a little bit easier. One or two, maybe less roadblocks is sometimes for some people all it takes to help them to get out of where they're at, and to help them get on the proper path.
And I'm married to an American white chick, is what I call her. And my daughter is like me, dark skin color, and my son is a little white dude. And every day I remind them of the fact that I'm an immigrant to this country that came with one bag of luggage into an airport in Miami 22 years ago, with a lot of dreams and hopes, and everything that they have standing over their heads, the roof, the things that they have, the toys, has not been given for free. That there is a lot of work that his father had to go through, and segregation to go through. And to this day, I still am considered a little, quote, different because of the way I act and the way I express myself, or the way I carry myself, or how flashy I am with my clothes, my necklaces, my bracelet, or just my demeanor. But, it's who I am, and I'm not going to change. I'm extremely proud of my heritage. And I tell my kids, you must be proud, and everybody has to be treated as an equal. And unless we start changing the mentality of the little children in this country, I don't think the generations are going to change.
No.
Despite the nasty politics that are happening right now for power, I think this is the moment to kind of get together and realize that there is more to life than hate. And I'm just extremely moved by this episode, Dr. Julien, because it's been a lot of empowerment for minorities. So before I let you go, I want to direct a little bit of hope and specifically get some advice from you towards international medical graduates, to young kid from India that wants, or let's say China, that wants to be coming to America, has great USMLE scores and has great letters of recommendation, wants to become a neurosurgeon. What do they have to do, and what are the roadblocks they're going to be facing once in the United States?
So the biggest roadblock is obviously they're going to be an FMG. And their scores more often than not are going to be better than American students. And so what they have to realize is that it's not an equal sort of comparison. FMGs always are looked upon differently. The biggest thing is that not only being a foreign medical graduate, but depending on where they come from makes a big difference. Someone who, like you said, China, but maybe India, Germany, Canada, or United Kingdom, they're going to be looked upon in a more favorable light than some of the other foreign medical graduates. And it's all because of their similarity of their medical system to the U.S. system. And so that's the one thing. And so, there are a lot of high school students, and the medical training is very different in other countries than it is in the U.S. And I know that because, like I said, my parents are from Trinidad. They grew up in the British system. And so in order, you can go right to med school from high school. It's 6 years. And what it is combined education. It's basically 2 years of undergrad, 2 to 3 years of undergrad, and 3 years of medical training. And you get the equivalent to an MD. And so that's the one thing. As far as if those roadblocks come up, my biggest suggestion is to not give up. If your objective is to get in and practice into the United States, the next thing is to do research in the U.S. because that's going to be the biggest thing that's going to distinguish you between some of the other kind of applicants. And to do research in at an institution that is one of the better known in the field that you want to get into. That's the other thing too, because that way you can work with the people in that field. They know who you are, and letters of recommendation make a big difference in the U.S. system. So even though if you're a foreign medical graduate, if you have 1 or 2 letters from someone that's well recognized in the field, and who knows, sometimes it's someone that we've trained with or trained us, and so those make a very, very distinguishing mark compared to someone else that has similar kind of credentials. That can actually kind of put you over the top as to someone. If there's 2 people with similar credentials, they're going to take the person that has the letters from people that they know and respect. And like I said, sometimes it's even people that they've trained or have trained them. And that is one of the biggest things that I can emphasize, is if your objective is to really get into the United States and you don't initially, you have to be persistent and you have to kind of do these fellowships, research, all these sort of things to get you around the people that can either give you the letters that you need or can actually bring you in. I mean, that's what happened to me initially. I mean, that's why I was able to get an advanced spot, is because my second year at NYU got counted as a residency spot. And that was the first time that had ever been happened at NYU. A fellow who spent more than 1 year there actually got counted, one of the years counted towards the ABNS. And when I told Dr. Hodge that, he was like, come on, I don't believe that. Because he thought I was going to have to start, all the way from the beginning. And I was like, no. It was like my second year got counted as a PGY 3. And so, I was a PGY 2 going into PGY 3. So I was available for a PGY 3 spot. And that's what he had planned. That's what he had available. And so I was like, I'm eligible for that. And so he did his research. He called the board, and he was like, I'll be damned. He was like, and his friend at NYU, and this is what I'm talking about friends. So one of his very best friends at NYU was Dr. Cooper. Got to know Dr. Cooper very well. And he was the one that actually did this for me. He was like, I'm going to talk to Dr. Kelly, who was the chairman, and we're going to keep you on for another year, and I'm going to work. He said, I can't make any promises, but I'm going to talk to Dr. Kelly and have him work to get you the second year counted. And I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yes. He's like, you're a really good fellow, and I want you to be a resident somewhere. We'll get you a residency somewhere. And that's what I'm talking about as far as working with these people to in the field that you want to prospectively get into. Because without Dr. Cooper's help, I might not have been able to get in. And I know I definitely wouldn't have gone in, and I'd have to start all over again. So, yeah.
I think all of us need an angel, and I have said this probably 10 times in the podcast. For me, was Dr. Kelly O'Keefe to give me the opportunity to become a board-certified residency-trained emergency physician, because that's what I wanted. So Dr. Cooper was your angel and the one that kind of gave you that opportunity. So we all need a chance, and we all have been given a chance looking back at some point in time of our lives.
And that's why I talk about mentors. I couldn't have gotten where I am without Dr. Cooper and Dr. Hodge. Those two people got me where I am today.
Wow, that's very sweet for you to say. So last question before I let you go. What's the personality that a neurosurgical resident has to have? I know that you guys go through a grueling, painful, long hours, crankiness attending sometimes, and you make it through 10, 12 years of brutal training. What's the personality that you have to tolerate the pain and the abuse?
You have to have tough skin. Because neurosurgery now is nowhere near how it was back in the 90s. I mean, I call it a powder puff neurosurgery now because back in the 90s, I'm telling you, it was grueling. It was called every other night, every third night, at most every third night. Most of the time it was every other night. I tell people when I was at NYU, it was an unregulated, and this is before the 80-hour. And so I spent 3 months covering the VA service by myself. 3 months on call every day. I mean, it was call from home, but you're still on call. You're still getting calls every day for 3 months. It's brutal. Every weekend, I mean, I couldn't go anywhere. I was stuck in New York for every weekend for 3 months. And I'm telling you, neurosurgery back then, it was very different, very different. And, that's part of the reason why, the 80-hour work week came in. I never experienced 80-hour work week. When the 80-hour work week came in, I was a chief resident. And of course, at that time, chief residents were exempt. Even now, chief residents are exempt on surgery. I don't know about any other subspecialty, but the chiefs on surgery are still exempt from the 80 hours because there's no way as a chief of any surgery subspecialty you can spend 80 hours and expect to cover the cases that you need to cover. So
that makes sense. Well, you heard from the man. I'm going to call Dr. Terrence Julien the man because he broke through it. And I think the last hour and 15 minutes have been phenomenal. I'm impressed. I'm surprised. And I'm going to tell you, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you. And I hope I never go to see you for a brain tumor.
No.
Never, ever. Thank you for fighting this horrible disease and this horrible condition. And from the bottom of my heart and my listeners, I hope that the message that they get to capture is one of motivation, is not one of criticism, is not one of judgment, is not a statement of us against white people. We're all in the same boat. We're one same race on this planet. Let's keep it together and let's be happy. There is no need to have hatred, and let's try to make, as the president says, America great again.
Exactly. Anytime, hey, you want to do any more, let me know.
You've been fantastic. A blessing. And thank you so much, Dr. Julien, for being on the show.
Have a good day.